Welcome to the Weekly Lead Podcast. I'm Becky Tirabassi, co-pastor of Viewpoint Church in Newport Beach, California, and this podcast is designed to reach people who have known me over the past few decades. I am looking for leaders, weekly leaders, and each week I bring a message from a sermon that will encourage you to lead by being loyal to God's Word, encouraging to others, advocates for the young generation, and devoted to prayer. Here we go. Join me now. We're going to look at three unstoppable, and I chose that word. In fact, this entire title, every word I chose very carefully. When I thought about, I almost put timeless, and then I went to unstoppable, which means impossible to prevent. So the three things I'm going to share are the reason it's impossible to prevent Christianity from exploding right where you are. So three unstoppable change factors. Of course, I love that word change, but it means to make a difference. Things that make a difference. From first century Christianity. We're in the book of Acts. If you're reading along with us in the Change Your Life Daily Bible, or you're doing the 100 Days of Prayer and Bible Revival, raise your hand if you're doing 100 days. Okay, you realize that every single day you get commentary from the book of Acts, then it will be Romans, and then 1st and 2nd Corinthians. The book of Acts is a travelogue. It's an amazing, you're going to see Ephesus, Macedonia, Corinth, everything. And if you don't get this little bit of history, then you're just reading letters later. When you get the history of what's going on in the book of Acts in the early church, you start to see something exploded. And it exploded right in Jerusalem and then went out. So this first century Christianity had a genuinely, I love the word, authentic or sincere, genuinely good and pleasing, which means pleasing and welcoming. When someone says that's good, it's pleasing, it's welcoming. Early Christianity had a genuinely good and powerful, that's strong. It wasn't wimpy. I've been told, when I first became a Christian, my friends did not want me to become a Christian. I was way more fun, party person. So they were like, no, Christians are weak people. Do I look weak? Do I feel weak? Do I seem weak? I was so strong so quickly. When I became a Christian, they were like, wow. So don't use that line on me. Don't use the Christians are weak people. I'm not going with it. Yes, let's go. I want you to be as fired up as I'm fired up, okay? These three unstoppable change factors from the first century Christianity had a good and powerful effect, meaning an impression. They made an impression on a person, a culture, or a society. Individuals are the persons, right? Individually. These three unstoppable change factors should absolutely change your life. It should change your culture, meaning your social group. Only when I moved to Newport Beach did I hear the term friend group, my friend group. I don't know. I never must have had a friend group until then. Now I get friend group. Oh, by the way, I got to say something. We have a problem getting a drummer. Today, 3 drummers are here. Would you raise your hand, my 3 drummers? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Yeah, 3. We go from none to 3. Don't stop coming. I need you. So you are my friend group. I'm going to put you in a friend group. How many of you are in a friend group, in a text group with me? Yeah, that's trouble, isn't it? At 6 a.m. in the morning, you get this zinger. No. And then society. It's the community or the nation, the society in which we live. I must add, in light of the national landscape, I think you will find, perhaps like me, that this message coming this week, because this is where we are in the Bible, not because I chose it, but this message is incredibly appropriate for navigating our current culture and our current community. Yes, the book of Acts in general, and Acts chapters 15 to 20 in particular, which are this week's readings, reveal 3 unstoppable, though admittedly at times uncomfortable, factors of Christianity that still have the power to genuinely change a person, a culture, a community, or a nation. The first unstoppable change factor of first century Christianity was its mandate, and I don't say it lightly. First, fill in the blank on your outline, was to live sexually pure. Now, through Paul's preaching, Gentiles were fast becoming Christians. You realize we're at the halfway mark in the book of Acts. We've traveled some time now from Jerusalem, and Paul's gone out, and Paul's come back to Jerusalem because there's a bit of a hubbub. The apostles, led by Peter, and the elders of the church of Jerusalem, led by James, the half-brother of Jesus, and the whole church of Jerusalem had to have a council meeting with Paul because he's blowing it up over there. People are coming to Christ, and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. They want possibly, and this was the hubbub, and you're going to see it if you read closely. They, the Jews, the elders, the apostles, were thinking everybody should first become a Jew, then become a Christian. They should get circumcised, they should follow the law, then they become a Christian. But in Acts 15:28, this apostolic council that met in Jerusalem to debate, should a Gentile become a Jew first in order to become a Christian, they wrote this, Acts 15:28. For it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay no greater burden on you than these few requirements. You must abstain from eating food offered to idols, from consuming blood or meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. If you do this, you will do well. So after this big deal meeting with the council, they send Paul and Barnabas with a letter to these outposts to report on the decision made and concluding this: avoid idolatry and avoid sexual immorality. Now, the Greek word for sexual immorality in this passage, you will probably hear, is porneia. It's the derivative of porn, or illicit sex and other PG-13 and R-rated words that I will not share. But in Strong's Greek lexicon, which is like Webster's English dictionary, you go to Strong's Greek lexicon to get what does that word porneia really mean. It makes a comment that I thought was interesting for Acts 15:28. It said, new converts to Christianity from among the heathens regarded this vice, this sexual immorality, they regarded it too lightly and indulged in it too easily. The Greek word for the opposite of that is chastity. We don't use it anymore. It means abstain from sex outside of marriage. It's kind of simple. But in William Barclay's commentary, and you know I love William Barclay, on the book of Acts, he writes, it has been said that chastity was, now I don't know if it strikes you like it strikes me, but it struck me. Chastity was the only completely new virtue that Christianity brought into the world. In an impure world, Christians had to be pure to stand out or be set apart. Of all the habits of each of these cities, in Corinth, in Macedonia, in Thessalonica, in each of these cities, this would make you stand out. Because why? Because this gospel message, having quickly left Jerusalem and Judaism, where the 10 Commandments are like, don't commit adultery and don't have idols, avoiding idolatry and avoiding sexual immorality was already part of the fabric of life. Not so much in the other parts of the world. Sexual purity to the rest of the Greek and Roman world at the time would have been revolutionary, because idol worship was what they did. In some places, child sacrifice. In other places, sexual immorality was completely the fabric of the temple where there was prostitution in order to, I don't know, worship gods. So we're at this halfway mark in the book of Acts. And this message about living sexually pure in the form of a letter from the apostles and elders was going to travel with Paul through Corinth, Thessalonica, Macedonia, Ephesus, Galatia, Asia Minor, and the Roman-ruled provinces. Did anyone track this stuff, how quickly it's going, how much they travel? These locations, though, were known in the first century as hotbeds of cultural, cultish society norms. So the first century Christians introduced something different and good, pleasing, clean, into a very sexually hyper-sexual culture. Living sexually pure was, from the onset, to be the identity, the defining quality of Christian men and women. Why? Why? Because I think even in our nation, in the 21st century, you can see that sexual purity is welcoming, pleasing, different, good. Here's where my mind went as I studied this. I thought, I'm going to look up in each of Barclay's commentaries, just in the preface, what Paul had to say. You see, Paul took this message. This was the Jerusalem elders and apostles endorsing Paul. Paul writes most of the New Testament from this point forward. And in looking, I just thought, I'm going to pull out these 5 commentaries and just see, for example, in his letter to the Thessalonians, in the preface, Barclay writes, he wrote the letter to prevent a relapse into sexual immorality. Listen to this like it could be a headline today in the American news. It was hard to unlearn the point of view of generations and to escape the contagion of the non-Christian world around them. Does that sound like 21st century? But Paul would ask these Thessalonians, as you're going to read later in the fall, live sexually pure and not only live moral, holy lives that are pleasing to God. He uses the phrase pleasing to God. This is why. You need the why? Pleasing to God. He tells them excel at it. Excel at it. Excel at it. To the Galatians, Barclay describes Christianity to that culture, this new virtue, as a gift. This is going to be a gift, your sexual purity, to the men and women. After my own conversion to Christ, one of the first and most obvious changes in my life occurred the very day I asked Christ into my life. Most of you know this, some of you don't. I thought I was pregnant, didn't know by whom. I was going to possibly go to jail. Big problem, all of it, filled with immorality, the whole bit. The day I asked Christ into my life, it's as if I went to a council meeting of what it looked like to think and live like a Christian, except it was a janitor who had the council meeting with me. It wasn't a pastor. But that day, simultaneously, in asking Christ into my life, I ended living sexually immoral. Just that day. Boom, done. Not going there. Now, you might find this odd, but it was a relief for my own safety and my own sanity. I literally felt like I was given a gift to be a single woman and have permission to live set apart and holy, to hope that one day someone wanted to be with me for the rest of my life and never leave me for someone else, and who would not just want to live with me, but ask me to be his wife. I'd done the first 5 years different. I was very fortunate after only 3 months, after becoming a Christian 3 months later, I met Roger. Himself a relatively new Christian, but here's maybe what's different about the 20th than the 21st century. He had set a standard of living sexually pure for himself. And because of his standards, he protected me. In Paul's letter to the church of Ephesus, he now is speaking primarily to Jews who had maintained such a low view of women for so long. He began to preach to everyone that women and wives and children were no longer to be treated as possessions and slaves. This was extremely countercultural. And it came at a time, and I didn't know this, I found this in the history books, when Jewish girls decided, well, then I'm not getting married because I don't want to be treated like that. They refused to get married. Barclay reminds us in his commentary that Paul broke through the conventions and traditions for husbands and wives and children while speaking to the Ephesians, and he sets a new standard of love and respect in which, and I quote, a Christian marriage is a most precious relationship whose only parallel is the relationship between Christ and the church. To the Romans and the Corinthians, as you'll later read this summer, Paul gives a laundry list to the immature Christians in that church, beginning with sexual immorality. It's really ugly, but they're very ugly. Boldly contrasting their culture using words such as wickedness and shamefulness with this clarion call for Christian men and women, you see, it was always men and women, to live above their culture in a new, holy, and set-apart way. So not only in the first century, but every century since, living sexually pure in a sex-crazed culture may look impossible, but it was intended that Christians would be culture changers, not the ones who blend in, but the set-apart ones who stand out. In my first textbook of seminary, it's still probably one of my favorites. I took an ethics course. It was, you do this after a while. You go, I don't want to take the regular courses. I want to take something I don't know anything about. So I decide to take ethics, and then I get this. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to learn a lot. Glenn Stosson from Fuller writes this. In broad perspective, sexual ethics is not just about what behavior I can and cannot do, must and must not do at various stages in my life and in various relational contexts. It has to do with integrity and character, with the total reclaiming of human sexuality for the covenant purposes for which God created it. It is important that sex, with its deep personal longings, takes place in a context of faithfulness and forgiveness and mutual respect and enduring loyalty in a faithful and lasting covenant, and not in a context of rivalry, fear of not being accepted, and eventual abandonment. That leaves deep scars. How we relate sexually. In other words, Kingdom Ethics, this book, was about Jesus, what he taught, not what Paul taught, not even what the church taught, what Jesus taught. How we sexually relate is a critical arena for Christian proclamation and instruction, but one that is often neglected due to fear of giving offense or simply being embarrassed or ashamed. In my notes, I put, why must a girl on her first date in Orange County have to say, I'm waiting until marriage for sex? Why does a girl have to say that? Why? I've been a pastor 9 years. That's it. That's what's going on. In 2006, I wrote a book called The Burning Heart Contract, and I had no idea how much the call to purity would change by 2022, and not for the good of young men and women. It hasn't changed for the good. Would anyone agree with that? Yet now, more than when I wrote it, this free 21-day adventure demystifies how living sexually pure as a Christian is not only possible, but unstoppable. It changes culture. I hope you've been encouraged by this message, and I hope you join me every week for the Weekly Lead podcast. Meanwhile, you can follow me daily on Instagram at Becky Tirabassi and find the link in the bio with everything you need to become a weekly leader.